On August 13, 2018, officers from the Frederick Police Department responded to a welfare check at a family home in Frederick, Colorado. Friends and relatives had become concerned after Shanann Watts could not be reached and failed to attend a scheduled appointment. As the hours passed without contact, law enforcement was asked to determine whether she and her two young daughters were safe. At that moment, officers were responding to what they understood to be a missing persons investigation.
I know.
Their initial responsibilities were to locate the family, establish a timeline, and gather information from those closest to them. As investigators documented the scene, interviewed witnesses, and collected evidence, the case evolved into one of the most closely examined criminal investigations in recent American history. This documentary follows that investigation using information drawn from public records, court proceedings, and official law enforcement findings. As concern grew over Shanann Watts' unexplained absence, law enforcement began a standard welfare check to determine whether she and her daughters were safe. Friends reported that Shanann had returned home during the early morning hours after a business trip. Later that day, she failed to attend a scheduled appointment and did not respond to repeated phone calls or text messages. Those close to her described that behavior as highly unusual. Officers documented the condition of the residents, interviewed those present, and began establishing a timeline. At this stage, the investigation remained focused on locating the missing family members and gathering information from witnesses. As additional evidence became available, including surveillance footage, witness interviews, and digital records, investigators continued comparing each new piece of information with the developing timeline to better understand the events of that day. After completing the initial welfare check, investigators turned their attention to reconstructing the family's movements during the hours before Shanann Watts and her daughters were reported missing. One of the first priorities was to establish a reliable timeline. Detectives interviewed friends, neighbors, co-workers, and others who had recently been in contact with the family. Each statement was compared with available records to determine when the family members had last been seen and how events unfolded over the course of the day. Investigators also obtained surveillance footage from nearby homes. Although no single recording provided a complete picture, the footage contributed to the broader timeline by documenting activity in the neighborhood during the early morning hours. Digital records became another important source of information. As is common in missing persons investigations, detectives sought records that could help verify locations, communications, and the sequence of events. These records were analyzed alongside witness statements and physical evidence collected during the investigation. Rather than relying on one piece of information, investigators compared multiple independent sources. Their objective was to determine which facts could be confirmed and which questions remained unanswered. As additional evidence was collected, detectives continued refining the timeline, allowing them to better understand the family's movements and identify areas requiring further investigation. As the investigation progressed, detectives shifted from the initial search for missing family members to the careful process of evaluating every available source of information. Investigators compared witness statements with surveillance footage, digital records, and other documented evidence. Their objective was to establish a timeline supported by independently verifiable facts rather than relying on any single account. Surveillance footage obtained from nearby homes was reviewed alongside information gathered during interviews. Detectives also examined records that could help confirm movements and communications during the relevant time period. Each new piece of information was assessed within the broader context of the investigation. Rather than drawing immediate conclusions, investigators worked to determine which details could be confirmed through multiple independent sources. At the same time, forensic specialists continued documenting evidence collected during the investigation. Standard forensic procedures were followed to preserve materials for laboratory examination and to ensure that the chain of custody remained intact. Throughout this stage of the inquiry, investigators emphasized accuracy and verification. Every interview, document, and piece of physical evidence was evaluated as part of a methodical investigative process designed to reconstruct the events leading up to the family's disappearance. As additional evidence became available, detectives continued refining the timeline and preparing for further investigative interviews. As additional information became available, investigators continued comparing every documented fact with the developing timeline. In major criminal investigations, detectives do not rely on a single piece of evidence. Instead, they examine how different sources of information support or contradict one another. Witness interviews, surveillance footage, digital records, forensic examinations, and physical evidence are each evaluated independently before being considered together. Throughout the investigation, detectives worked with specialists from multiple disciplines. Digital forensic analysts reviewed electronic records, forensic personnel documented and examined physical evidence, and investigators conducted follow-up interviews to clarify details and verify timelines. This process required patience and careful documentation. Every investigative step had to meet legal standards so that any evidence presented in court would be reliable and properly authenticated. As investigators continued their work, they refined the sequence of events using information that could be independently verified. Their focus remained on establishing the facts through evidence rather than assumption. The investigation eventually progressed from a missing persons inquiry to a criminal investigation. From that point forward, every additional interview, forensic examination, and evidentiary review was conducted within that legal framework. As the investigation concluded, the case moved into the criminal justice system. Prosecutors reviewed the evidence collected during the investigation, including witness statements, forensic findings, digital records, and other documented materials. Based on the available evidence, formal criminal charges were filed. Rather than proceeding to a full trial, the case concluded through a guilty plea. This meant that the court did not hear evidence before a jury in the traditional manner. Instead, the legal proceedings focused on accepting the plea and determining the appropriate sentence under the law. During the sentencing phase, the court considered the documented facts of the case together with statements presented through the judicial process. The judge imposed multiple life sentences without the possibility of parole, along with additional consecutive sentences as provided under Colorado law. The legal proceedings brought the criminal case to a close. However, the broader public discussion surrounding the investigation continued, with ongoing interest in the investigative methods, forensic evidence, and legal process. The case has since been examined in documentaries, books, and academic discussions about criminal investigations, investigative interviewing, forensic science, and the role of digital evidence in modern law enforcement. The investigation into the deaths of Shanann Watts, Bella Watts, and Celeste Watts came to a legal conclusion through the criminal justice system. However, its impact has continued to be felt by the victims' families, the local community, investigators, and many others who have studied the case. For law enforcement, the investigation demonstrated the importance of methodical police work. Detectives relied on established investigative procedures, comparing witness statements with surveillance footage, digital records, forensic examinations, and physical evidence. Rather than depending on a single clue, they built a comprehensive understanding of the events through careful documentation and verification. The case has also become part of broader discussions about investigative techniques, forensic science, and the role of digital evidence in modern criminal investigations. Training programs, documentaries, and educational materials frequently reference the importance of preserving evidence, maintaining accurate timelines, and following legal procedures throughout an investigation. At the center of this case, however, were real people whose lives were tragically lost. Remembering them with dignity is more important than focusing on the notoriety of the offender. Responsible reporting seeks not only to explain what happened, but also to acknowledge the human cost of violent crime. Thank you for watching this documentary. If you found this examination of the investigation informative, consider exploring additional documentaries that focus on verified evidence, investigative methods, and the criminal justice process. As always, consult multiple reliable sources when learning about complex criminal cases. And remember that careful investigation and due process are fundamental to the pursuit of justice.